Thank you. So Larry said, Michael, would you help with this auction? And I said, sure. And I was on the acquisitions committee. And that next year, 1985, we was the single largest fundraiser in the country for HIV and AIDS. We raised over $75,000, right? To be topped the next year by the walk from all walks of life. Right? And that auction, I think, continues to this day. It's a biannual auction now. But during the second, I was on the committee for a couple of years, and I was still working at the Fenway. And something happened that sort of changed the course of my life, probably forever, and was the beginning of this work. And a young man came in looking for money for a taxi to go to the hospital. And we didn't have any money in the kitty to get a taxi for him. And, Larry is working next door with Gail Beverly and Tom Yannick, right? And, we had 2 nickels to rub together in those days. But we were also at the same time dressing people up in tuxedos and bringing them to fundraisers for the transaction committee. Right. No money for a taxi, but it was so difficult because the urgency. That's okay. Yeah, don't worry about that. Got it. Nobody sees that but us.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Well, that's right.
Yeah. So I found that distressing, right? And I ended up having a huge fight with the Art Center committee, kind of stomping out, very indignant, right? And my good friend Pam Hoyle, who was on that founding committee, said to me, Michael, you could be helping people a lot more by doing your artwork. And I didn't really understand what she meant. But I had been working, if you look over here in the studio, these boxes on the shelves are small shrines that I have been working on. And they're part of the annual Medicine Wheel project that is installed yearly on December 1st at the Boston Center for the Arts for World AIDS Day. And I was invited to do something by Carol Ann Meehan, who was the curator there in December of 1992 to mark Day Without Art. And I hadn't really made these shrines yet, but I decided to bring in a truckload of granite blocks from the quarries in Quincy, from where I grew up. And I scattered them throughout this room, 10,000 square foot room, and asked people to pick up a stone and carry it to the center of the room and feel the weight of it. And I thought it was a good idea. And 2 women found the largest stone, probably weighed about 120 pounds. And they tried to push it across the brick floor. And they were making some progress. And I offered to help, and the woman said no. There was a young man ringing a gong every 16 minutes. In 1992, every 16 minutes, somebody in this country was infected with HIV. Long gone, this beautiful young man, long dead from AIDS. And they said, no, thank you. I offered a 3rd time because it really felt like they were not making progress. And one woman looked at me and she said, you don't get this, do you? Her son, my nephew, just died from AIDS. This is our weight. I felt like I had been kicked in the stomach, right? But what I had been really happened, I was invited to do my life's work. I'm going to fast forward to 16 years later. There's a painting on the wall over here of a young man carrying a bucket of water. Our youth, many of them who are in the back row here, right? They weren't here 16 years ago, but the youth group who were here was more than 16 years ago, I guess. But we carried 16,000 gallons of water from Fort Point Channel to the cyclorama, because that year, 16,000 young people between the ages of 13 and 25 were infected with HIV. And they were really beautiful buckets lined with copper. And they had 24-hour candles in them. So we carried them into the sun every hour of the day on December 1st for 24 hours. We walked 7/10 of a mile to Fort Point Channel, and we hauled frozen, because it was 6 degrees, frozen seawater, and carried it to the cyclone. One of our young women, when stopped by a passerby in a car, said, "You know, what are you doing?" She says, "It's an art project." And he goes, "What do you mean?" She says, "Well, I'm carrying water." And she explained it to him. He goes, "That's not art." And she says, "Carrying water is art." She really knew what she was doing. And so they had 24-hour candles when they got to the cyclorama. So the room appeared to get brighter and brighter and brighter during the 24 hours. And then it started to get darker and darker and darker. And the next morning, because it's only up for 24 hours, as we were getting ready, I'm waiting for my crew to take it down. A woman came running up the stairs, the front stairs of the cyclorama. And she ran over to the information table. And we had these books, there's a pile of them over on the shelf here, by Sal Lopez, of portraits of people in the early years dying from AIDS. And she's flipping through the book. And I said, "You know, we have hundreds of those books. If you'd like one, you can have one." And she looked at me, she says, "You don't get this, do you?" She says, "My 2 sons died from AIDS 15 and 16 years ago." At that moment, I knew that 2 women carrying 1 stone. Oh, she said, "Where are the buckets?" I said, they're here. And she went out and we broke the ice. Love, about children, about motherhood, about not understanding, about being seen, about being invisible, about being heard, being not heard. And when I was putting this panel together, I've recently become very good friends with a young man who died during those years, Peter Ansin. His mother, Mikki Ansin, is part of that story, that unending story. You see, the numbers don't really add up to the loss. We can say 7 million, that means very little to me. But the fact that it's somebody's son, somebody's brother, somebody's lover, somebody's mother, somebody's sister, somebody's brother, somebody's uncle, that's when we feel it. That's when we carry the weight, and that's when we share the weight. So I'm very happy tonight that Mikki and we have a series of Peter's photographs that I think, Richie, why don't you show those first, that Peter took of the early ACT UP days, and then Mikki, you can talk over them, Mikki, or you can take a quick look at them. So if you will.
Well, Peter died in 1992, and I did inherit his photographs, and I had them scanned and printed. Michael had them printed, and they're very powerful. And I'm a photographer with Getty Images, so I submitted them to Getty Images, and that's an agency that sells photographs. And now they have a lot of sales. They're selling Peter's images all over the world happily for the cause, and I've met people through it, and I'm very proud to be a participant with Michael, especially. And when you talk about losing someone, it's a terrible pain. I don't even know if I can talk about it, but you just have to learn how to live with it and carry it through your life and be brave. So I'm not being very brave now, so you better.
Tears are brave. I think tears are brave.
There were times when Peter was dying of AIDS. He had thrush in his house. Thrush is a side effect you sometimes get. I'm sure everyone's had thrush at some time. But he went to the dentist to get something done about his teeth. The dentist saw the thrush. This is in Santa Monica, California, a very effete community. He refused to treat him, and Peter had to leave. And that, hearing that broke my heart. But Peter really fell in love with another man called Peter Carley. They're 10 days apart in age, and Peter Carley is my son-in-law, and he's the first person I called when I knew I was going to do this to say, what should I talk about? And you know, he gave me some thoughts. I don't know if, anyway, there are communities that have evolved like this to deal with this. People support each other. AIDS isn't going away. It hasn't gone away, and people are still dying of AIDS. Peter went to Stanford graduate school because he wanted to be a film producer. So he studied business, even though he said Stanford Business School took all his creativity out of him. But he did make two good friends, one Mike Smith and one Cleve Jones. And Cleve and Mike founded the Names Project, and Peter introduced me to them and asked me to make a quilt, which I did, and it's been a sanctuary for me. For 3 days in a row, people came and sat around my table while we sewed Peter's quilt. I had images printed of him on cloth from all of his life, from his babyhood. And there are some of, no, they're not here.
Yeah, they're here. Which, do you think everyone knows what the quilt is?
The quilt it's the size of a coffin. It's that big, what a coffin
Each
measures.
square.
Yeah, it's 3 feet by 6 feet.
And when you lose someone and you want to memorialize them, you make a quilt. Some people just put one photo, or I love you, John, or whatever, and then that's their quilt. And the quilt is saved by the organization. The names, it's called the Quilt Project and also the Names Project. It's now in San Francisco, and they have a big memorial in the Golden Gate Park. And therefore you have forever a memorial to whoever it is you have lost from AIDS. And it's supportive, they're supportive. In the days when people really got AIDS, when it first came, it was a stigma. People, it was like COVID was when it first came. Everybody was afraid of getting COVID. Well, you can imagine nobody even wanted to touch you if you got AIDS. It was, and there was a lot of anti-gay feeling because of that, and it all got lumped together. And Peter Carley, Peter's partner, told me it comes out again. The anti comes out in election years, and look, we're coming up to Trump. And look what's happening. It's all out there. The MAGA people, they're forceful. It's horrible what's going on politically right now. And I don't know, but I just hear some of the organizations that were formed that I was so fond of and so involved with during the height of the epidemic. Project Angel Food, Mothers' Voices, where mothers got communicated and had meetings and supported each other. Gay Men's Health Crisis, ACT UP, which Peter's pictures are of, because ACT UP was against the government not giving any information, not like Reagan and Bush did, not helped, not made medicine available. Like Donald Trump said, oh, COVID, it'll be over in a couple of weeks. It's all happening again. And I think it's important to be aware of that. And Fenway Community Health was just amazing. And when Peter was sick, he was visiting in 1988, and he felt sick, and he went to Fenway. And but the Names Project and the Quilt Project is something people should really look into and support Fenway, support Michael, and know what's happening. So there's still hostility, but the hostility today is worse when people are trans, I think. I mean, it is.
Yeah, no.
So you guys talk. Hi, Jen.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
And,
you.
for the last few years, we've had the great privilege of bringing sections of the Names Project quilt to the Cyclorama for World AIDS Day. And we'll continue to do that as long as we're able. We also invite people, if they'd like to bring a certain panel, that we will order that panel for you for a donation. We've had Peter's panel there
A few
a few times, right? And so that is always a nice way to remember. And the quilt is such a powerful thing because there's often made, as Mikki says, in community, right? With odd bits and pieces of people's lives stitched
Men who
together.
have never threaded a needle in
Right.
their lives, that were sitting sewing.
We're all, and it really reinforces the connection, the thread that runs through all of our lives, the thread of humanity, right? Thread of connectedness, right? That beautiful tissue, right? That gives meaning and depth to the human condition, right? And that a quilt is often called a comforter, right? It's a blanket, it warms you, it holds you. So it's a really beautiful thing. So next on our panel is the amazing Abe Rybeck. Now I'm thinking, I have very dirty knees today because I was out at Medfield State Hospital working on a project. Well, it's the truth. But, I first recognized Abe's work when he was doing pop-up theater in the Fens, or the Fenway in Boston, near the Victory Gardens, which was a very infamous, probably one of the most infamous gay cruising areas in North America, if not the world.
Yeah.
And in the early years of this pandemic, Abe used his art and the power of art and the power of performance to respond and help people locate themselves in something that was so baffling and so strange and so terrifying,
Yeah.
right? And it was around that, the reason we're all here because we came to these awarenesses around the same time, through the loss of loved ones, and we had to do something, right? I'm an artist, Abe's an artist, Jay's an artist, Mikki's an artist, right? And we know that sometimes you can't explain what's going on, and so the power of art becomes very important. So I'm like so thrilled to I've always looked up and admired Abe.
That's sweet.
Not on my knees. But
Yeah.
Listen, there were a lot of yets in life, right?
So, thank you, Michael. I better stop you there. I'm gonna, we have text to deal with here. I'm gonna tell a couple stories and do a little performance. And with the performance, Mikki, is it okay? Well, I'll check with you when the time comes and we'll just make it. so much that was brought up there is so profound that I those early days in the Fens, that was really intense. I want to go back further though, because there's a lot of young people here. I don't know if there are a lot of young people on Zoom, but there are in the room here. And that when I think back on where the roots of my work are, it's junior high school, younger than I think probably any of you are. People imagine that growing up queer and Jewish in the mountains of West Virginia is some kind of, dueling banjos nightmare. But in fact, though there were challenges, I had a really great support from some of the people in my family. Hey, come on in, stack. And for instance, my brother Chick, my oldest brother, came home from college after his first year in college, I think. And so I was in 9th grade and I was flunking out of 9th grade. And my brother came home from college and he brought me what it turns out was the first pamphlet published by what's now called the task force. Then it was called the National Gay Task Force. And it was amazing. I read it and I was like, oh my God, this pamphlet, I could take this pamphlet and I could adapt it into a solo performance piece and put it on in my social studies class and get extra credit, and then I won't flunk 9th grade after all. And so I did it. I grabbed the pamphlet and I went into Mrs. Neville's class and performed it. And weirdly, like nobody really reacted until later that afternoon when I made the unwise decision of going to the bathroom, which queer kids, most of us knew better than to go to the bathroom. But I went to the bathroom and a bunch of guys from the class came in and they beat the shit out of me. And I remember when they left me there and they had taken me by my long hair and stuffed my head in the toilet and, so I was cleaning myself up and I was thinking, those assholes, who the hell do they think that they don't even know who they are? But I do. I do know who I am. Flash forward 10 years. It's 1984. And I'm living here in Boston. And for folks who weren't around in 1984, it was really hard, not just the George Orwell kind of hard, but the Ronald Reagan kind of hard. And, union busting was going gangbusters. Before the early 80s, unions were very powerful in this country, and that was all destroyed mostly in the 80s and 90s. There were US funded wars raging throughout Central America. And, racism was white hot here in Boston. And, in my circle of friends, a lot of people had already died of AIDS. And so we were feeling really desperate. And I remember there was a demonstration at the JFK building that was against Reagan's embargo against Nicaragua, right? So Nicaragua had a socialist government, and so he surrounded them with ships and wouldn't let them trade. There was an embargo. And I went to the demonstration, we did like civil disobedience, we were all locked arm in arm and chanting something really profound, like arrest us, arrest us, arrest us, you know, until they arrested us. And then we were chanting like, let us go, let us go, let us go. And I remember thinking our lives are on the line. We feel like we're putting our lives on the line. And even I think it's boring. Like, that's not good. This should not be dull. And I was with a group of other fags, you know, other queer men, and we called ourselves United Fruit Company. And if you don't know that term from anything else, you know, Google it. United Fruit Company was our name. And you won't find us if you Google it. You'll find the reference we're making. And I was like, this is not right. So I just wrote a silly skit that's not even worth describing to you, but it was fun and queer and silly. It hopefully was gonna educate people in a queer way about what was going on in Nicaragua. And I gathered together a few of the guys, I slapped a wig on my head, and we started performing this skit. The script was just in our hands, and someone recently sent me a picture of this from the first day I ever performed. So we have our scripts in hand and we're doing this crazy skit. And, you know, by the way, when we were doing our demonstrations, part of why I was so frustrating when we were doing the civil disobedience was because the secretaries would walk out of the building for lunch and they would walk right past us. They wouldn't even be paying attention. I'm like, we're getting arrested in front of your building. You know, but they were like, no, we're going to lunch. And I thought, I'm going to get those secretaries to think about this. That was my agenda, right? So the next day, like I said, we're putting on the show, and the demonstrators were into it, and that was fun. And then the secretaries walked out of the building. You know, these women with whom I had nothing in common, right? They're just walking out to lunch. And so I started acting really big, and they ignore us. And I'm so frustrated. I'm like screaming, moving my wig around, whatever, and, you know, making a big scene. And finally, one secretary is like, what's going on over there? And like grabs the elbows of a few other secretaries and comes over, and they come and watch us. Like, I don't know, maybe a dozen secretaries. And so we're putting on the show, the secretaries are watching, they're laughing, we finish up, and I'm like, I've done my job. I've taught these secretaries about Nicaragua, and, you know, people were gathered around, we were laughing and talking about it, and then the secretaries walked over to me, and the head secretary, I guess, the elbow grabber, said, you know, excuse me, I just want to say thanks, because a few weeks ago, my best friend from high school just died from AIDS. And I want you to know, he would have loved this. He would have really gotten a kick out of it. And so it's so great for me to remember him when I'm seeing this. And I just thought, this feeling of connection with this woman who I had been so stupid to think I have nothing in common with. This is the feeling I want to feel for the rest of my life. This feeling of connection across these boundaries is what matters. And that was the beginning of my work. I got the courage to do it and the sense of self to do it from political pamphlet when I was 13 years old from my oldest brother. And the gift from this secretary of connection, personal connection. I'm just gonna sing a little song now. Oh, I just knocked water over on the floor. Is that it? Should we do anything about that? So I'm gonna ignore it.
Ignore it.
Thank you, Michael. So if we want people on Zoom to see this, I hadn't thought about that before. So I'm wondering if somebody Elisa, or maybe somebody further back even, could somebody hold that and, you know, kind of face it toward me now and then?
Yeah.
You know, kind of keep it toward me. So when we were performing in the Fens, which Michael was referring to, by the way, the Fens, if you haven't been there, it's a beautiful park. They've ripped out the part of it where all the cruising happened. So for 100 years, for a century, it was the biggest cruising area in New England. If you don't know what cruising is, it's just simply where gay guys, when they had nowhere else to meet, would go to meet and have sex and connect in other ways too. There was a lot that went on.
There
Go ahead.
there was people there that weren't gay.
Thank you very much. That's a really important point. I said gay men. There were people there who weren't gay. There were people there who weren't men. There were lots of variety of identities. And one of the cool things about it was it didn't require any language necessarily. So there were also lots of people there who didn't speak English at all. So it was a common thing. I mean, to get the point across, what I say, it's like, it's right by the Back Bay. So, you know, you could get a blowjob in a blizzard. This was 365 days a year. Like, it was crazy. There was, at lunchtime, I mean, it was, we're gonna have a little fun here, right? Lunchtime was special because there's thousands and thousands of employees in these skyscrapers next door. So you would, you know, you could fuck somebody's ass who worked at a building called Fidelity or Prudential, right? With these very uptight words that they were all coming out of those, swarming out of those buildings to go fuck around at lunch.
Well,
It was,
they were going to the flower.
they were going to look at flowers. Okay. So anyway, while this was all happening, this AIDS at the time, and we're talking about AIDS here, but I thought Mikki did a really important thing in mentioning COVID, mentioning really the Black Lives Matter movement, certainly these other the trans rights to healthcare. These are things that are all on the same par. They're weaponizing hate to kill people, literally engineer the system so that people will die. That's scary. And it's happening right now. This is not it was happening then, but it's happening in these young people's lives. You're facing this as badly as we did. So I want you to create work even more exciting than anything that we did. So this song, which a couple of you have heard way too many times, I apologize, but this song is called It's Risky. And I was inspired to create it. In the 80s, there was a big movie that came out about guys who would get together and do really risky stuff together just for pleasure, just for crazy fun. And a bunch of them died from it. It was called Everest. It was about mountain climbers. And I just thought, like, there's so much prejudice against queer people right now because of AIDS. And then there's this like IMAX movie about mountain climbers going and just getting killed. And they're being celebrated where we're being told we have a death wish, you know, because we want pleasure. So I couldn't make a multi-million-dollar IMAX movie, but I wrote this song called It's Risky. Let's see if I can get the tech to all work here. Oh, that sounds good. Well, it's a risk when you take a piece of the rope. You try to climb a cliff. But once you're up that slope, you are a hero, not a fool. It's a risk when they bring that Bellevue box. You gotta get your kicks from when you take your knocks. You take your licks from hunky sweaty chonks. If you survive, then you're the tops. It's a risk to fall in love. Oh, that is dangerous. But taking the chance, thing that entrances without it, romancing is a must. So it's a risk to buy, but time's worse. Abortion, it's a risk. But so is giving birth. A risk. We weigh what it is worth. We take precaution, then we lurch. Sex is risk. Measured on pleasure and raw desire. Life is risk. Lives at risk. Sex isn't suicide, it's not murder. Sex is life at risk. And it's a risk to fall in love. That's dangerous. But taking the chance, the thing that entrances without it, romance is a bust. Hey, that hurt. Thank you. Well, it's a risk. Yeah. Okay, now we're trying to get this set back right. Let's see if we can get this set back right here.
That was good.
My butt was good from the back.
Oh, your butt looks fantastic.
Okay, good, good. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for clapping along.
Yeah. Come on, sing it. Jason.
I like your voice better than mine. Okay, this is why I'm live instead of Zoom.
That's right.
Next time.
Because, you know, we have in the back row here, a group of young people who work for us here at Spoke. And they are our leadership cohort. And they have been charged with a youth manifesto to present to Boston Housing Authority,
Oh,
right?
great.
On, you know, really giving authentic voice to young people's desires, to their needs, to their demands, to their lives. And so congratulations, guys. And one of the reasons that the four elders are up here, right, is because we need you to take us into the future. Right. This work, right, of building a place where we all belong, where we all feel safe, is so urgent, maybe more urgent than ever. And so for you guys to step up and be part of this leadership cohort, you know, it's so humbling and so gratifying to me, beyond any words, right, beyond any words. My hat is off. So, talking about leaders, right, we have the most amazing artist. Many years ago, Mark Weintraub, who worked at the Mass Cultural Council, was talking to me, and he says, you know, Michael, he says, you need to look at what Jay Critchley does. Did I ever tell you that? And the money. And he said, and he says, that's the problem, right? That you have to sometimes do things without money, because he worked for the Mass Cultural Council, which is an arts funder for the state of Massachusetts. And he says there, you know, the people like Abe, people like Jay, people like yourself who are figuring it out, you know, how to do really big work. In those days, it was daunting because we didn't have many resources. but we managed somehow. I remember one year, 1997, for example. My friend Noel McKenna and I went over to the Fenway, not the Fenway that Abe was talking about, but by the Museum of Fine Arts. And we gathered 7 million oak leaves, right, to represent the number of HIV infections, right? And we counted the first few bags and estimated how many bags we needed, and truckload after truckload, right? And built a giant wave of leaves, a spiral pattern of leaves in the cyclorama that was about a mile long to walk into the center of the room. But it cost us nothing. But it was this enormous installation, right? So when we want to make change sometimes, and Abe made a reference to this, you know, we have to do it because we're called to do it. And we have to do it sometimes without very much resource, right? And I think the part that Abe was talking about, but didn't maybe talk enough about, but we can come back to this, is we have to be willing to put our lives on the line for it. And that's often like really scary, right? And you know, if I'm not terrified when I'm doing my work, sometimes I think I'm probably doing something wrong. That, you know, I want to be going into unknown territory. And be willing to meet the challenges of that unknown territory and know that I have the resources in myself to do that, right? Not the financial resources, not the material resources, not those measurements, but that I have something within me that has been called to goodness. And, you know, I have always so admired that Mark Weintraub was correct. You know, Jay Critchley was called to goodness early. And his work has always been a manifestation of
Well, speaking of money.
that. Oh,
One of the, you mentioned the first AIDS auction in Boston. Well, I live in Provincetown, so I'm not from this urban kind of setting that we've been talking about. It's a different kind of nature-based more. But I have a septic tank in my backyard. Now, does anyone know what a septic tank is? People in the city, you take a shit, it flush down, you don't know where it goes, right? Well, in Provincetown, a lot of rural areas, you have your own separate cesspool in your backyard. And it's, you know, so there was an abandoned septic tank in my backyard that I didn't realize till like 20 years after I put a new one in. And I opened it up, and inside was this gorgeous, incredible universe. My life changed when I looked into the circular, elegant, historic cesspool. And one of the first things I did, it was the AIDS auction in Boston, and I offered tea for two in my.
that's right. That's right.
And people
I
bid.
remember. That's right.
People bid on tea for two in my septic tank. Now, it's not a large space. It's 6 feet in diameter, 5 feet deep, but it's a beautiful, very Provincetown historic circular space. And it became a theater in the ground instead of a theater in the round.
Right.
And it was Province, and the New York Times called it Provincetown's only true underground. So
It got so much press, I remember.
it did, and I had
much.
an opera there. You know, I had seasons of performances there. Laundry School of Music with Donald Gold came every year and did a septic opera, Heaven and Hell, and these different performance artists, poets, drag queen. Abe performed there.
I did a spelunking piece.
Yeah.
Cave exploration.
That's funny.
So, and relating a little bit to my background, like Abe was doing, I was raised very strict Irish Catholic in Connecticut. We were the Catholic family of the year. Thank you. Pictures in the paper. We sang, we were either praying or singing. And so we were on the American Idol of its day, the Ted Mack Original Amateur Hour.
Oh, my
So-
God.
And so there are my 5 sisters, I had 8 brothers and sisters, 5 sisters and me would come out on the stage and they would say, here are the Critchley girls. And I'd be like. So, anyway, that's a little background, but, you know, I moved to Provincetown. Well, first of all, on my way to a boat that was taking me to London on this work exchange program in 1969. I graduated from college. Coming down from Connecticut into New York, on the radio, it was the exact time that the Stonewall riots were happening. And I was listening on the radio, and of course, I had no idea I was gay or queer or any. And I just remember listening, thinking, what is that about? Like, it was like a whole, like the announcement today about the Saudi Arabia Gulf and the. It's like, where did that come from? You know, what is going on here? So, anyway, so eventually I came back and I was a Vista volunteer, which is kind of like a Peace Corps volunteer on the West Coast. And then I started working with youth and I ended up in Provincetown. And my son, I was married to a woman, my son was born in Provincetown. And it took me a while to come out, you know, it was very like painful, like, you know, if I were a murderer, it would have been better. It was that bad. Anyway, when AIDS started, you know, we started hearing things about HIV in Provincetown. Now, Provincetown, are you all familiar with Provincetown, Cape Cod? It's a historic community. The Pilgrims landed there and they shot at the Wampanoag natives and they stole their corn. It's also a historic arts community. When I arrived in Provincetown, I didn't know I was gay and I didn't know I was an artist. So I came out first as a gay man, and that was painful. But it was 5 years later that I came out as an artist because it was much deeper. And I was 33 years old and I'm a born again artist. You know what a born again artist is? I found the Lord. I found my calling. When we started hearing about people, this strange disease, no one even knew it was called the gay plague back then. And friends started dying. We're like, what is going on? We started helping them, things like that. And people started moving to Provincetown to die.
Yeah.
Because the early days of like the first couple of years or so of the AIDS pandemic, people died within a couple of weeks, literally. They'd get pneumonia and they'd be in the hospital and then boom, they were gone. So we started meeting and creating this, you know, organization, People with AIDS Coalition, which was more about self-empowerment and issues like that, not so much about the medical model, which we talked a little bit about the government and Reagan administration not supporting any kind of innovative treatments or drug research. And it's important to know that AIDS activists literally changed the health system in the United States and forced the government to respond to the community's needs. So I was sitting on the beach with my friend Walter in Provincetown, and you know, I started the Swim for Life, which is a swim across Provincetown Harbor. But the original impetus for it was about the environment. And it was at a time in 1988 when a lot of beaches were being closed in New England because debris was washing up, needles and things like that. And we're like, wow, we have this beautiful harbor. Let's see if we can swim across this in beautiful environment, embracing harbor. It's one of the largest harbors in the world.
And so we finally got this Long Point and swam back, and we're like, everyone's like, no, the bluefish are feeding and you can't swim across the harbor. It's 1.4 miles. So we did, and then 2 weeks later, we put out a call and we had 16 swimmers that joined us in swimming across the harbor. Now, the first year, we had a jug of water on the beach. People came and we left from the shore and swam to the tip of Cape Cod. And we got there and we had no way to get back. That's how organized we were. We're like waving people, help! Bring us back." So eventually, that was in 1988. Now it's the 36th Swim for Life. We've raised $6 million over the years for HIV and also women's health and the community. And we started this project called the Prayer Ribbons, which is similar to the quilt, except the difference is that it's not about honoring people who have died. It's about honoring people who have died and people who are living in the community of care. So it's honoring your network. And so we started, people would come and we'd write notes on these long, 5-foot-long colored ribbons. People would write notes to their loved ones, to the people they want to remember, people they want to honor. And they're all put up in these long lines, clotheslines of ribbons. And there's about 4,000 of them. So in 6 years ago, when the Pulse nightclub shooting happened, the massacre, do you all know about what happened at Pulse in Orlando, Florida? 49 mostly queer young people were murdered in a nightclub in Orlando. 49 people. And so in Provincetown, the organization, we decided we would create a special strand of ribbons in honor of these young people that have been murdered. And again, we're talking about the connection between healthcare and gun violence and injustice and environmental injustice and all these issues. They all relate. They all relate. So we had a ceremony with at Provincetown Town Hall, and we took a strand of 40 feet of these colored ribbons, and we had put the names and black ribbons in gold and the names of the 49 people, and we read the names off and put them on the strand of ribbons. And then we were invited to come to Orlando and we met privately with the families of the victims with the strand of ribbons. And every year, except during lockdown, the ribbons have been strung up in front of Orlando City Hall during this anniversary, which I'm going tomorrow, and I have the ribbons right here. And would you like to see them?
Yeah.
You want to help me?
Took them on the bus.
Yeah,
I think they're gonna bring them over here.
wow.
Oh, yeah, you were right. Let's just-
So these are the ribbons that are going to Orlando.
Wow. I think we need to get further back again to get the, could you hold this back there?
You have to like look at.
Like this? Look over the top of it. Oh, yeah, that, right now that's showing, that's great.
Please come on up. Read some-
Audience, anybody else who isn't holding the camera, can come up and see up.
William Lloyd Palatine. And
David Bolton.
Christopher Andre Remenard.
Roger Gooden, RIP forever, love you.
You can see the black ones are the victim's name. Why don't you all come up? Any other names?
Very born.
Like,
Alejandro Barrios Martinez.
yeah, like that.
My dear cousin, Mary Ellen Edby, may you rest in peace.
Louis S. Belmont.
Peter, Oscar is, we'll see on look at it with your eyes, so you can see. There you go. You will be.
Here, maybe I need to do it a little while because it's.
Gerald Arthur White,
Barry L. Rubenberg the second. You want to read a name?
Huh?
Read a name.
Oh, yeah, read the name. Oh, got you. Rodolfo Ayala.
Antonio Jabon Brown. Barry Ronan Burton. Well, it's awesome that you're like traveling.
Oscar A. Shane Montana. Christopher Joseph.
It's like when you get on some live, you know,
Anyway, we can,
thank you, Jay.
Hey. Unbelievable.
Right.
One more thing I wanted to mention, is that.
Yeah, talking to the,
Is that, in 1989, I was invited to be at a show at, MIT, called Trouble in Paradise. And, Dana Fries Hansen was the curator. And Dana Fries, and so it was the year, and we talked about the politics of the 80s, you know, Reagan and Bush. And in 1988, there was a lot of controversy about burning the American flag. And so the Congress was trying to pass a constitutional amendment to ban the burning of the American flag. And the Supreme Court upheld the right to burn the American flag as a free speech thing. So I thought it was a good time to use the American flag for a safer sex campaign. So I proposed Old Glory condoms. And Old Glory condoms was the theme was worn with pride countrywide.
Never flown at half mast.
Right. And never flown at half mast. And so the image of the flag was put on a condom. So when you took the condom out of the pack, you know, the image was on the condom. And so, you know, I actually set up a corporation. As an artist, I set up a lot of corporations because I feel, you know, if I have a platform, I put a tie on and I can talk about the environment, I can talk about justice or things like that. So I actually set up a corporation, the Old Glory Condom Corporation. And the purpose of it was, of course, to talk about HIV, but also to force the government to deal with HIV. Because at the time, it wasn't even like visibly or verbally talking about. So I applied for a trademark for the name Old Glory Commons and the image Old Glory Commons on the flag. And so I had a lawyer who is now head of the ACLU, David Cole. He was then at the Center for Constitutional Rights. And so he represented me with the government because they said that it was immoral to associate the American flag with sex. And so after 3 years of fighting the US Department of Commerce and the trademark office, they eventually awarded me the trademark for Old Glory Commons.
Yeah.
Great. But so, and so to me, the strategy worked because for 3 years, there was like this national conversation about this project. You know, like the government is denying free speech and, you know, people aren't talking about age. It went on for 3 years. So, and I recently sent David Cole a mug with Old Glory on it. And I said, thank you for 25 years ago for, and he wrote me back and I don't have the quote with me, but he said that case was a really significant case in jurisprudence. Because it said that it was okay to use not only the flag, but certain ways that you can free speech is allowed, and that particular case made it much easier for people to speak out.
And the fact that if it's significant, that means people keep reading it and reading it and reading
Reading
it.
it, yeah, that's right.
So anyway, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on this panel.
Thank you all. We're going to open the room now. I'm going to put it on gallery view so we can see everyone else who is
wow.
on Zoom. Oh, Richie, can you take the spotlight off of us? Yeah, we're spotlighted. What? Can you see that spotlight?
Yeah.
Do people have any of the people in the room, you'll deal with Zoom, but do people in the room have any thoughts or questions or crazy ideas you want to pursue that you want to scheme with us about?
I'm curious about this Old Glory condom. Is it? I'm not in the market for it. Does it exist? Does it still exist?
Well, I'm looking for some financial backing to revive it and getting back to money again.
Why don't you license it to one of the big condoms? And then you can get royalties.
Yeah, licensing is something that I've looked into, yes. Right now, it's you know, I sell T-shirts and, you know, things like that, but.
It'd be cool to have it on the function.
Well, it's
Some of us still have ours.
yeah, I mean, I always thought when
Has it been that long, Kathy? Gotta get laid. Right.
But I always thought one of my projects would make me rich, so, you know.
That will make you rich. That will.
Okay, we'll talk.
Other folks have, there's folks murmuring. And I'm not like, that's fine, but I just thought, do you have any ideas, any thoughts? Nah,
Come on, guys, you have thoughts.
yeah,
So. All kinds of people are on this. Okay. And I think
sure. So that first one, well, it's interesting because I'm just gonna use that as a chance to do an aside, which is what I'm working on now is a collaboration with 3 Nicaraguan artists that look back on that period from a queer point of view, both from the US and from Nicaragua. So this ends up being, who knows what you're gonna work on now when you're a teenager. And in my case, 40 years later, you might find yourself reimagining that work. Jay saw I brought them together with me in Costa Rica and we worked on it, and Jay actually saw a workshop we did about it. But anyway, the first skit, this is all references that people my age might get, but yours, I'm gonna have to tell you about it. There was a TV commercial for Folgers coffee. Does that even exist anymore? Does Folgers coffee even exist? I don't know. Folgers coffee, and the spokeswoman for Folgers coffee was Mrs. Olsen. For some reason, she was Scandinavian, and her thing in all of these commercials was that she would solve marital problems with coffee. Whatever the problem was, coffee was the answer. So this skit was about two gay men or two guys who were, actually, it's about one gay guy who's a neighbor of Mrs. Olsen, and he's distraught. And Mrs. Olsen is like, well, what's wrong? And he says, I have guys over, I meet guys, I take them home for the night, and we have sex, and then they just leave. They don't, no one ever stays for breakfast. No one ever stays overnight for breakfast. And just to get this time warp thing, introduce you, this idea of staying for breakfast, that was like gay marriage in 1982. As if someone stayed for breakfast, that was gay marriage, right? You were in a relationship. You were in a relationship that they stayed for
Well,
breakfast.
the Shirelles sang about it.
That's right. I needed to use the Shirelles song. So anyway,
Will you still love me tomorrow?
will
Yeah,
you still love me tomorrow? Written by Carole King, made a hit by the Shirelles. And so.
Listen, you've taken notes and looking all this up, you youngins.
Okay, so the skit, the guy says, Mrs. Olsen, my tricks never stay for breakfast. And Mrs. Olsen said, if you break Reagan's embargo against Nicaragua and get them some good mountain grown Nicaraguan coffee, rich with the aroma of liberation or whatever, equality and liberation. Your trick, what?
That was funny.
Oh, thank you. So anyway, he breaks the embargo against Nicaragua. He gets Nicaraguan coffee, has it brewing when the guys come over for sex, and they stay for breakfast. It smells so good with the aroma of
That aroma of coffee is
liberation.
funny. Who would leave?
That was the skit. And I swear I was wearing my dead grandmother's wig. I did not, my drag was so bad. I had no sense of drag at the time. I'd like to think it's gotten.
I'll attest to that.
Yeah, he saw me in those years, and it was bad drag. But I should
That was
also
the
mention.
charm of it.
That was
the charm of it, conceivably, if it had charm. And I think I can't tell this story without, I did tell the story without saying this, but I won't now, which is Miguel Maldonado and Miguel Macaluso and oh God, I shouldn't have started this because I'm going to get people's names mixed up in my head. The guys who performed it with me, 3 of the 4 guys are dead. Abel Guzman Maldonado, that was the name I was reaching for.
I remember seeing United Fruit Company protesting cardinal law.
That was fun.
Technically you did, but I just remember you guys making an appearance and acting really outrageous.
Well, it's interesting because when we were protesting cardinal law, who was a very conservative cardinal, who at the same time he's claimed to be, protect the children from gays, was protecting priests who were raping kids, from prosecution. But anyway, it was a pro-gay marriage rally, and I don't know why on earth they called me to that, but they did. And I showed up in a wedding dress and saying, I want to get married. And the song is a country western song I wrote that ends uncovered in blood. It's about marital violence. And it questions like, why is this the thing that queer people should be fighting for? But now I'm glad it's legal. Anyway, there were that was a part of the law.
I just want to say it's nice to see some of a lot of us were just out of high school and college, and a lot of this was going down, and it was really nice to have folks who were older and were to be part of that activism. And so I was at Lydia, I mean, the stuff that we were doing in support of free speech, it was the culture wars, which was also about the healthcare wars. So it's nice to see some folks haven't seen in a while who we kind of literally ran the streets with.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to say something about Lydia. Lydia Eccles. Lydia and I collaborated on a project at the Institute of Contemporary Art when it used to be on Boylston Street. The Blessed Virgin.
I'll remember that.
The Blessed Virgin Rubber Goddess.
That was so great.
The Blessed Virgin Rubber Goddess. And the whole concept of it was, and I was doing a lot of research about the Blessed Virgin and her goddess roots, you know, that were stripped away by the Catholic Church. So she became this sort of, like intermediary, but she never really had the power that she had as a goddess. So, just like the Black Madonna or the Lady of Guadalupe, I thought, well, let's connect HIV to the environment. Okay, and where do condoms come from? The rainforest, the rubber trees.
Latex.
So Blessed Virgin Rubber Goddess was about immaculate protection. And so Lydia and I did this project together, and Lydia did this drawing of the Blessed Virgin with the full moon, or the quarter moon, and we created votive candles, and we had t-shirts, and we had a whole thing going on. You want to say something?
Yeah, I remember, I had always liked votive candles, like, and a lot of the votive candles say on them, concentrate on your desires. So the votive candle said, concentrate on your desires. And it ended up getting censored. The ICA had tours of the show, and they directed people around where the votive.
Also, the ICA put a poster, and there used to be a tea stop right at the ICA near Mass Ave.
That's right.
And they had a poster of this drawing of the Blessed Virgin Rubber Goddess, and somebody vandalized it. And so we had this long running, and ICA didn't want to do anything about it.
Yeah, and the Catholic newspaper wrote an editorial condemning it.
But the ICA refused to question the tea about, what happened here, this is not okay. And it went on for a couple of years. Finally, we forced them to deal with it. But, yeah.
Can I just mention, I'm gonna turn this around so that in case you need to read my lips while I'm saying it, that I think there's something important going on in this discussion. Lydia, Kathy, Eliza, who's sitting right here, so many of the people in this room, plus all of us, our work is a web. And that's if this question is about how art makes social change, that is how. It's not that an individual artist makes a piece of art that has nothing to do with anything else, and that piece of art changes the world. That's not what art changing the world looks like. What it looks like is a web of reference and influence and love and caring between people and support and people and collaboration.
And collaboration.
And collaboration. So I just want to point that out, that this is not like a coincidence that you're witnessing here. And I say it because you young people who are here, mentors are great. I'm all for it. But really look to each other because you will be collaborating with each other. Maybe still when you're our age, you look to what is the community that you have with each other for inspiration, support, love, caring, and ideas.
And remember, guys, we're talking about having known each other 40 years ago. Right, so into your future 40 years, right? You'll be sitting in front, perhaps of a group of young'uns, right?
Hopefully it doesn't take that long.
Well, hopefully it doesn't. So David Leonard is here.
Oh my gosh, David.
Hey, David.
Hi, friends. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. First of all, just like thank you all for doing this panel. I think it's an amazing piece of our living history to both recall and just share with people today in this Pride Month. I know Abe and Michael know bits of this story, but I first came to Boston in '92, which happens to be the first year that you were both talking about a little earlier in your presentations. That resonance had been lost on me until this moment, but I came from Dublin at the time to find my new home in Boston, and left an Irish society that was struggling with the same things, 84 to 92. I worked with one of the first HIV support groups, AIDS support groups at the time that was trying to grapple with this in good old Catholic Ireland. So you can relate to a little of that. And I think my own coming out story is very much tied to that community. And then, just finding, the medicine wheel work in just to mark World AIDS Day. And also, Abe, finding the what was it called at the time, but the Queer Arts Theater Festival that was happening in Boston. And I think we invited you to Boston College to the gay and lesbian group at some point in time, but just doing that. And so it's that web that you're talking about, that stuff is real. And, those of us who were on the peripheries of your work, I think appreciate it and hear these stories. And now I have the privilege of spending a little time in Provincetown every so often, so I can connect to the other parts of the panel as well. So just thank you for sharing your stories and continuing to do the work. And I think I'll leave you with this question. We've seen the rejection of the queer community throughout the country right now, and our trans community members in particular are being the ones perhaps most under threat. And that has resonance with the rejection that those struggling with queer identity in the face of HIV/AIDS had back in the late 80s and 90s. So I'm just wondering if you could share thoughts around how the work then, the ongoing work, can help be supportive in today's world.
There's some people shifting, so that's what's why there was a shift up here. I have a thought on this, but it's a short one.
Go for it.
First of all, love to David, the young people in the room. Raise your hand if you've ever been to Boston Public Library, the main one or the branch.
What's the main?
In
Which one?
Copley Square.
Or any of them.
Oh, all of you, yeah.
But that's great. So everyone in the room raised their hand, and David, who I loved and respected for many years, is the head of your library.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
on the
David-
phone
yeah,
with
here he
him right
is.
now.
David is the head of Boston Public Library.
Hey, everybody.
Right, there he is. Right. Right.
Say hey.
Thanks for spotlighting me. I'm not in my usual library.
And Pride this weekend starts right across the street from the library, and I just really want to say again to the young folks who are here, none of us were in positions of power in any conventional sense when we started this work together. And there's a community that lifts people up. Now, of course, David is an extraordinary leader to be leading one of the most important institutions anywhere in the Northeast in this country. But it's a community, your all relationships with each other is what lifts each of you up. I just want to emphasize that again. It's crazy, David, like I couldn't think of a better example, and you come right out here talking. I just quickly want to say that with the attack on trans people, it's heartbreaking and infuriating every damn day. And we've got to stand up to this. And those of us, I'll speak for myself, with the privilege of being cis and white and gay, need to be standing up with our siblings, with our buddies, with our friends, and even if they were our enemies, for one reason or another, standing with them on this. And I want to say one detail about this that might be helpful. I'm from Triadelphia, West Virginia, outside of Wheeling, the big city was Wheeling, West Virginia. And Wheeling, West Virginia's city council is made up of 6 old, rich, white men. And one 27-year-old trans woman who's really progressive and has transformed my hometown by proposing really bold, radical changes in housing and transportation. She's upped the bus service. There's improved the housing service for low-income people. She's super progressive. She's great. And so remember that when we write off big chunks of the country, because there are a lot of conservative people there, be careful and remember to stay connected with the progressive people in all of those parts of the country, including the trans folks in Alabama and West Virginia and North Dakota, who are being used as pawns right now. So I just want to emphasize that.
I'd like to say that in Provincetown, all the drag queens have gotten together and formed a coalition of people, and they're raising funds to support other drag queens that have legal problems, or trans people that are being attacked around the country. So it's going to be a very visible thing in Provincetown this summer.
Wow.
That's fantastic.
I just want to bring up to the attack on the reproductive rights, this other piece that's really what that means and how rape culture is surfacing that way. So I just want to bring that piece up, and I also want to reiterate that ACT-UP's one of its pillars was universal health care for all, and that we still don't have it in this country. Pre-existing conditions, one of the reasons we got rid of it, I was on that team to do that, was that people couldn't get health care if they had HIV/AIDS, pre-existing condition.
Right.
So that was one of the up at the State House, that was one of the things you brought up about that, and how that hits the arts community, and how they would redline if you were a hairdresser or an artist, that they wouldn't want to give you health care like the university. So we're back in that discussion around healthcare, and it's entwined with all of this. It's not one, it's entwined, it's a culture war. And the same people that we were battling, Concerned Women from America, if you guys remember how we freedom of expression, those are the same groups that are spearheading what we're seeing as part of that. So I just want to say that that's to be aware of, and all that web, that they also have a web. Sounds have a web.
Yes.
And that the intergenerational stuff is really critical. When I'm saying this to young people in the room, stay in the room with the adults. Don't let them take you out and be part of that conversation.
You've got mail.
That's how that works. We have to all work together at the engineering results. So that's just, I know, right? So I just wanted to share that piece of it, to think about that. 'Cause that's what's
Right on.
Yeah, Kathy, go, yeah. Amazing. Yeah, David, we could have a whole panel, I think, on the question that you've opened up, right? One of the things that, we've worked on a lot here is this concept, and Abe touched on it very powerfully in that story of that trans woman in government changing your whole state, right? She's called to be herself, right? Each of us has a story. I have a story. We now in this room share a story, right? We have our story, right? And that story reminded me that we are all part of the story, right? The story of existence, the story of the human condition, right? And so often, I think the struggle is how do we fit in as opposed to where and how do we belong, right? And this yearning for belonging is a real yearning, right? And I think the challenge is how do we, in this web that we're talking about, right, create this radical hospitality, right, where I'm not inviting you to my table, right, because it's still my table, but how are we building a new table, right, where each of us can claim, our rightful place at that table, whether you're sitting next to somebody, as Abe was saying, that you like or you don't like, right? Because real change happens when we reveal ourselves, first to ourselves and then to each other, right? When we remain invisible, change is impossible, right? Because assumptions are made of who we are, and a box has been drawn for us, and we try like crazy to fit into that box when we don't. Right? So this is a very powerful invitation for me on, on how to be called to be Michael, right? I said to a young man today who was the son of Tara Mooney, who's
Oh, my
right,
God.
right. Tara Mooney, who started working with me in the early 90s. She was at the Victory programs as an expressive arts therapist, and she brought her AIDS clients to World AIDS Day, right?
So brilliant.
And so brilliant, died a couple of years ago of lung cancer. And her son reached out to me a few weeks ago to come out,
Oh, my God.
right? And today he was in the hospital being evaluated because this transition is stressful, right? And we talked about his mom, and he talked about being called, wait, here we go again, a mother's love, right? Right, the same story, right? We all have that story. We all recognize that story, right? And he was discharged. He was evaluated and discharged today from the hospital and is doing great. But he said to me that he wants to be part of this work, right? That he's always felt a part of this work, right? I'm looking around and I see my partners in crime in the back row here. I see my partners in crime in the front row, right? And to my right and to my left, right? And I'm exactly where I belong right now, right? And, and I feel like everyone in this room has my back. Right? That's like extraordinary, right? Now, I think that what the problem in the world is, there's many, but is that a lot of people don't have that experience, thinking that everyone has their back. So we have to see each other clearly. We have to love each other. The challenge is, how do we love someone today without expectations of who we'd like them to be, and instead with acceptance of who they are, right? And how do we nurture and see that person, right? And I have a lot of disagreements with a lot of people, and but I have a lot of love and tolerance for people who I don't want people to see it my way, right? I want people to find themselves, right? So the work continues, and I think the power of a night like tonight for me is that these pockets of extraordinary work. I've gone down memory lane and like looked into the future today of projects, right? And these pockets have to be like a drawstring has to pull them together so that we can amplify this work and carry on, right? And I'm like really delighted that we have people, you know, I think, you know, who are young teenagers and people who are in their 80s in the room, right, tonight. And that's real testimony to how community is built and how community comes together. So thank you, David, for being here. I love you so much. Anything else?
No.
No, Mikki says no.
No.
Hey, Richie, will you show Peter's work again for people in the Zoom room? And everyone, please look at Peter's work in the back, right? And Michaela's work.
It's actually, it's.
Yeah.
Let's hear it from Michael.
Yay.
Let's hear it for Jay. Let's hear it for Mikki. And let's hear it for Abe. Let's hear it for everyone.
Great.
That was fantastic.
Peter was.
I never, I don't know what took me today.
Running the streets of. So when I tell people how to go to steps, do. A lot of photographs, people are just very perfect.
But he was already living out there, right? She said he went to business school.
But she knew everybody, she
I
knew
bet.
James, she helped Henry Mill get elected, I mean,
Yeah,
that's.
yeah.
Community was.
Right, right. And it still is. Mike Smith called me today, just before I was getting everything.
Oh,
done.
great.
I was such a good project with Peter. Peter introduced me to them and then said,
Why don't
what
we-
it be to be.
Everything about them is every.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
That might come just today. I was so,
I tried.
that's what you said.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the replay.
Yeah.
It's.
It's still here. And it- it's still on.
They just, they create a lot.
Business, but it's so.
Well, it was, I mean, I was thinking about.
Right.
And Kate was like, just. Fine.
There.
Oh.
Now they're.
The whole.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's good, you know. And
Yeah.
No.
There.
I just want to advertise, you just, no, it's great.
Yeah. So Lydia did it last.
I don't think I ever heard, what did you do?
Last year, I showed a movie about a song, it was part of the, my, like, reading the whole time project.
Take that off.
Well, I did it like a percent. I cleared it all out, like, that's how. I take myself.
But I don't know, there was other people that said, like,
I know, I was the first person to say that.
It's called reality and modern life. It has to do with me learning something about physics. And.
I came in a cab.
It sounds like.
So I can go.
Do you want? Hey, honey, good to see you. Hi.
I wanted to talk to you. My name's Chuck. Friend of mine.
Oh, Chuck, I love you.
Chuck amazing.
Chuck is like so much energy.
He's so key to get involved in whatever you do. He'll do it. He's a loving.
No, we become friends in Provincetown.
Good.
And he hasn't been, oh.
I only met him a
What's
year
this?
ago, but I feel like I've known him forever,
Thank you.
you know? He's just good people. I only met him a year ago, but I feel like I've known him forever.
Yeah, he's high energy, smart, you know, he's working at.
The warehouse.
Outside of Boston, south of Boston.
Yeah, Norwood. Have
It's in Norwich.
you ever been there?
Yes, I have.
Isn't it amazing?
Spent it a couple of years.
It's incredible. Oh, my God.
Thank you. Let me give you my car.
I have one.
I actually have a new car. I just got back from Scotland. I do know I do this camp on Liberty and collect plastic timber applications. I made a gown out of applications from the beach.
I love this.
And I was
I'm gonna
just-
send you.
I was just at a conference in Scotland. I learned the gown at a menstruation and sustainability conference.
Oh, my God. I'm a graciously creative person. I'm so.
Well, you know, yeah, I mean, I do it.
Oh, yeah, I'm serious about that. How do that thing? You should follow it.
Well, the thing about Shark Tank is you have to prove that your product is already happening. And I've been to some of those, like, some of those things.
Yeah.
Around the corner. Do you know about like